It is really necessary for the Senate to be aware that its future today is at stake. The Senate is threatened with disappearance if it is not capable of reaffirming its effectiveness, said by Jean-Pierre Raffarin, former French Prime Minister, in an interview on September 29, 2014. To demonstrate the absolute contribution of the senator, not only decision-making intended for the socio-political life, Cameroon, in an applied collaboration, has in its political ecosystem and administrative ramification the capability of increasing the efficiency of the Senate, which is the traditional power. Unfortunately, we have not shown real political, institutional, and normative commitment. Because, as for me, if we wanted to create a great difference between the National Assembly and the Senate, in the cause to represent the decentralized territorial communities, we would have permitted these decentralized territorial communities to represent the traditional authority. When we look at the code relating to the decentralized territorial communities, we witness questions related to education, health, the movement of infrastructure, culture, tourism, urbanization, and access to energy. These issues before were carried by the states, but most of them were referred to the competence of local elected officials. These questions are now, These questions are not new to us. These were questions addressed before. Even though culture and local power play an important role for all citizens, the fact remains that in the organization of our institution, there is no traditional representation of power at the national level. So, the Senate, as for me, had to play this role of representation beyond the interest of territories, represents the local power in order to allow custom, which is the real source of law, to be taken into consideration at the national level, so as to enrich the normative state architecture through the values that the local power conveys, taking into account precisely the ideas, the values of our nation at the highest level. A brief anthropological reading of the traditional power. The dimension of this power is totalitarian because of its capacity to conceal the social, economic, cultural, religious, and technical needs of the people who built it. This implies that traditional chiefs can be designated among the 3 regional senators appointed by the President of the Republic. It will be an argument that we have no point, for the simple fact that nomination is a discretionary act for the President of the Republic, and he may have the concern to take into account traditional power by appointing some traditional authorities as senators. But that equally depends on his will. It may also be possible that the one who will come after him will decide to appoint former civil servants, former state agents, former industry captains, as well as their different experiences in their different fields of extraction. They will be competent and able to address the questions relating to territorial development. It is important for this type of fundamental orientation to be enshrined in a law. A law is the expression and emanation and will which is imposed to all. And if at the time of its determination, due to the President of the Republic, 30% of the senators were appointed, if a clause had to be put in the discretionary power by prescribing that the President of the Republic, among 30 senators appointed, can only appoint senators who come from traditional authorities, this will be understood. But there is no constitutional clause that guides the discretionary power of the head of state. It is an open discretionary power that in reality allows him to choose a senator in such locality according to the political stakes and the drawings of balance between the different forces of the nation. For example, because this one is not in such government, rather than choose this senator because he represents such minority. So, in reality, it is a game of distribution and balance that the president chooses whom he wants to appoint as senator. But it would have been interesting if we really wanted the Senate to play this role of representing communities, representing the culture of the Cameroonian identity that was imposed in the different terms, which are constitutional terms, and the different laws that followed, such as the law of 2016.
Communautaire et la spécificité traditionnelle au niveau du Sénat.
But let us make the commentary more digestible by putting into context each entity involved. On one hand, the legal person called a decentralized territorial authority, and on the other hand, the cultural identity of our communities. The decentralized territorial communities are emanations of the state, legal persons under the public law other than the state, but who actually participate in the organization of state institutions. So, it's still part of the institutional game of the state. They are really representatives of our culture and traditional power in their way of saying things and living the world different from the way it is carried by the central institutions. And therefore, the objective of such a reform, if it were to occur, will be to ensure, within the framework of the Senate, the representation of traditional power, local authorities, so that for all questions which have an impact on the life of communities should also be discussed at the level of the Senate, so that there is a balance between the parliamentarians who will represent at this time. Therefore, a certain national and institutional vision of these questions, for example on education and health, to a dimension which is totally institutional and republican, and also a strong dimension which is cultural and traditional. We take an example on the question related to health. For example, on abortion, which can be discussed, we can have totally different implications depending on whether we are in the institutional republican field, where we can authorize abortion on certain conditions, while the traditional power will prove that abortion is a sacrilege because there is an offense against life. It is the same way with the question of female circumcision. While it can be totally admitted at that time by the traditional power, it will totally be incorrect and discussed in the institutions. So, while the parliamentarians within the framework of the defense of law, which is the emanation of the general will reprove, for example, that the practicing of this could be considered in certain communities that it is a very good thing because it allows to consecrate and ensure the fertility of the woman, the fidelity of the woman, and certain considerations which are in certain communities. So, we need this double vision of all questions relating to common interest, which can have an impact on the future of our communities. That will therefore be the role of the Senate, which will no longer take pleasure in playing the same role as the National Assembly, and therefore distinguish itself and sign its leadership at the national level in a singular way of representation, which is at the heart of the interest of our community.
Qui est vraiment au cœur des intérêts de nos communautés.
At the heart of the interest of our communities, comparison is perhaps right in this case. The Senate with this approach is the most operational chamber, but from dream to reality, how do we make this operational? The law is not frozen, nor like a stone. If we really want the Senate to play a decisive role in running our city and in strengthening our vision of democracy, we must reform the Senate. The Senate, as it is organized today, both functional organization and also the judicial organization which conditions the Senate, is an institution which is not truly democratic, and it is an institution which is condemned to be a subsidiary role alongside the role of the National Assembly. The voting system does not allow the influence of the population in the choice of senators, and the field of competencies assigned to the Senate does not allow it to really play a role that can guarantee the consideration of the interests of the local population at the grassroots level. Since there are often forms of dissidence that occur quickly between local elected officials, whether municipal councillors and regional councillors. When these local elected officials are appointed, there may not be any anticipation in the formal way, but may come into contradiction with the mandates they carry in relation to the expectations of the populations. We often have mayors who are quickly elected and become brigands who take over the budgets of the communities and no longer play the role of revitalizing the activity of the territory. And it is these same local elected officials who are already in contradiction with the populations that they are supposed to represent, who end up choosing the senators. So we then have a kind of reproduction of legitimacy. We have a reform of legitimacy which finally spreads into a kind of snowball effect from municipal councillors to senators, and therefore the current model does not allow people to directly choose their senators. I think that's a real problem in a democratic context.
Aux populations de choisir directement leurs sénateurs. Je crois que et ça, c'est un véritable problème dans un contexte de démocratie.
It only remains to hope that the next team of senators will consider, configure, and promise this necessity that embraces the whole life of Cameroonians.